Good evening. This is my book review that I read, Worship His Majesty, Jack Hayford. And what an incredible book. When we were given an assignment to do a book review, like you gave us, at first I was a little skeptical, but once I started reading it, once I got really more in the context of the book and understanding more of what he is worship and what his idea of worship was, it just was tremendous, and it was amazing just to see what he really had to say. And as before, when I got the book, I read the back cover, which I usually do for most books, and just reading the back cover just got me excited. And I just want to share what the back cover says. And it says, "The Father doesn't need our praise, so why does He prescribe worship as a daily activity?" As Jack Hayford revealed, God's grace His people with worship as a gift. When we enter into His presence, worship fulfills our spiritual needs as nothing else can. As we recognize and acknowledge God's holiness, we are liberated to discover genuine holiness. In this new expanded version of the book, and it just goes on, but just that first part, it was just, I'm just like, I can't wait to start reading this book. The last part of it says, "And when you wholeheartedly worship His Majesty, His grace will overflow on you in a flood tide of spiritual enrichment." I'm sorry. I love that. And when I started reading and I started to get really into the book and understanding what he had to say, I came to on page 64, chapter 4. It's called "Who's Invited?" That's what the top of the page says. And I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, is he talking about, is God invited, or is it people who are invited? I just want to read a section from it. Page 64, chapter 4, it says, "Whom do you want to come to church, and whom does God want there? How you answer this question will determine everything about how you worship God where people gather. If worship is exactly the privileged right of an approved membership schooled in the acceptable forms of the group, an outer may be allowed to attend service, but he will essentially remain outside." And when I read that part really hit me, because as I am doing practicums and as I'm working with the worship team, and as I'm growing as a leader in the worship team, something that I'm starting to notice after reading this page and in this chapter is, who are we inviting? Are we inviting people just that are members, or are we inviting people from the outside? And that was just something that really hit me, and I really pondered on this, and I really thought about it, and I was just like, God, like, what are we doing here? Like, what, as a worship team, and as we go into the room to think about what songs are we gonna sing for the service, for the upcoming Sunday service, like, are we thinking about just the members, or are we just thinking about us? But are we thinking as a whole, everybody who is walking in, new people, people just coming off the street, people who may be going through a hard time in life at this moment? And that's just something that really hit me. And as I kept reading, I came to another, on the next page, actually, on page 65. It says, "I've decided to risk the protests of spiritual prudists, humanistic ideologists. However, before an explosion of flashing red lights or blaring, dispute the halls, let no one mistake my meaning. I'm saying worship is for man. I have not said that worship is to man. And in saying that worship is a gift to man, I didn't say it isn't to be expressed unto God." So I remember thinking about that and going back to class when we had the discussion of, is worship for us or is worship for God? And I remember hearing that it's for both of us. I mean, mostly for God, because that's what we were created to do. But in this book, it's just saying that God created us to worship Him. And it's just so the fact that when we go through hard times is when God uses worship to bring us out of those hard times. But also, God uses worship for us to trust Him. And to continue on this, on page 66, there's some 3 points that he shares, and I just want to go through them. As God has provided worship as a means of entry to our rejoicing in the presence of the ultimate reality. Worship introduces dimensions of possibilities in every life that transcends our sin and our self imposed limitations as we welcome the transcendent one. Worshipping God brings the highest sense of dignity humanity can know. For the regular nature of His majesty brings to flow downward and inward. And that last point to me is just wow, because it's true. God created us to worship Him, and we were made to worship Him in a mighty way and worship His majesty, because that's what we were created to do. And going on and going more into the book, came to the next part on chapter 6, and same title, like a big title page, and it was big. So this is where it hit me, was the weakness of worship. And I was sitting there and I'm like, okay, how is there weakness in worship? But as I started to read and I started to see points, was I'll read the beginning. It says, "This reformation began for me when I started to look at worship differently. I was forced to acknowledge that I had not seen worship at the heart of our commission as it was Moses, at the core of our approach to the world's power system, at issue in our struggle with principalities and powers, as the key to our personal deliverance and destiny, as the goal of our being and becoming, as the central focus of our church's life, or as being over and above all in practical sacrificial ways." And then he says, I was willing to allow worship a place. I was willing to acknowledge its need and even its disabilities. And I was like, disabilities? But he's saying, and then he says, but at the bottom line, I found I had to struggle with my convictions about the relative power of worship in terms of changing, researching, confronting, or saving the world. I now confess I had a great deal more confidence in evangelism strategies and logic in preaching than I did in the miracle of worship. Thus, I viewed worship more as a part rather than as the point of the church being. So, I think what I got from this was that worship to him is not the main focus. It's a big part. It's big. It plays a massive part to all of church service and bringing in people. But what he's saying is the weakness of it is people tend to focus more on the worship part than the message. And that's what I got from that. And that's just something that was close to me, because I tend for me being as a worship leader and leading the youth, that I focus more on what worship time is and the message and what the punch is to get people to really listen to God and to really follow what He wants for us. This leads me to the next point, chapter 9, on page 131. It says, the shaping of a worship leader. And I was excited because I was like, okay, this is what I want to be, this is what I want to do. So as I was reading, he brought up 2 points. God not only is unopposed to emotional worship, He welcomes it. God not only allows the worshiper's plea for success, He rewards it. And that's cool, because sometimes I feel like people are like, I don't want to cry. I don't want to cry. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be emotional when you're worshiping God. He wants you. And that's what he says. Like, He wants you to worship me and cry and just trust in Him. And I think that's what worship is. Worship is trusting God that He will do amazing things. And that's what He wants. He wants you to worship Him so He can teach you to trust Him. And I want to read a scripture from Psalms 35:18. Then I will thank you in front of the great assembly. I will praise you before all people. And that's worship. Worship is praising people. Worshiping is loving people. It's amazing. And I love worship every time we start. And this book was amazing. I truly enjoyed it. I truly appreciate the impact that it made on my life. And I'm so going to recommend it to my worship leaders for the main service. And I just can't wait to get more in depth on this worship. And I probably will read the book again. That's how great it was. It's a great challenge, great chance to learn more. And I'm excited that I took this opportunity to learn and to take the challenge that I did. Thank you.